She is a director with the Community Foundation.
Anne has lost her internet, so we need a past president to take over.
Next man up.
I guess that'd be Mark.
I thought at first you said she lost her interest, but it's
Yeah, Anne says she can't get on, so we either need a past president or the president-elect to take over.
Well, let's do this. Have we introduced everyone?
I still see a few people. So if you haven't heard your name yet, why don't you introduce yourselves?
Well, I'm Wayne McCutcheon, prior Rotarian with your club and now a member of the MEAG Passport Club. You guys, your singing sounded a lot better since I left the club, by the way.
That wasn't a coincidence, Wayne.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Yeah.
Who else have we missed? Did we introduce Natalia? Natalia's here.
Natalia's here.
Hey, Natalia.
All right. So should we start? Should we try with the welcome song? See if we
If
can
you
make
got
that.
it, everybody mute again and go ahead, Mark.
it kind of sucks. May I sing it?
You want to sing it?
I'll
Kinda
sing it.
sucks.
No.
No, Ken can sing it. Well,
Yeah, Ken.
here we go.
Welcome to Rotary, glad you are here. Come shake our hands and share a friendly cheer. Whether from here or whether from far, we're glad you're here. We hope that you will like our little song because we're proud of St. Albert, and you'll agree. Our club enjoys some great camaraderie, so we do what we can to help with the needs of our community with our friends at Rotary. With our friends at Rotary.
Nice.
Awesome.
So next on the agenda would be the agenda that we don't have.
Well, we should allow Alan to introduce our guest speaker.
I like that idea. Alan, would you take that over, please?
With pleasure. Can you all hear me?
Absolutely.
All right. It is my distinct honor to welcome back to the Rotary Club of St. Albert, the Honorable Justice Kent Davidson, a former member of this distinguished collection of overachieving St. Albertans. Justice Davidson was born in Flin Flon, Manitoba, and as might be anticipated, was so far out of the mainstream of Canadian consciousness that he cannot recall whether he was born headfirst or the other way around, which may give us some plausible reason for excusing him of becoming a card-carrying, loyal member of the Liberal Party of Canada for lo these many years, despite the fact that his father was a prominent member of the Flin Flon Rotary Club and a Paul Harris Fellow recipient. Seeking reconstruction from this inborn error of constantly leaning to the left, he moved west to Alberta, where he took up residence at the University of Alberta, graduating with a Bachelor of Arts with distinction, majoring in Canadian history. Immediately thereafter, he retreated to Flin Flon, married Carrie, and then returned to Edmonton, restarting his studies and earning a Bachelor of Laws in 1982. Justice Davidson then launched himself into the time and effort mode of living by putting on and then disrobing articles of clerkship with Lucas, Bishop, Bowker, and White Law Firm, where he specialized in auto dealerships, funeral homes, and cemeteries, and then moved on to Miller Thompson LLP. During his journey in and out of court, the then Mr. Kent Davidson rose in esteem amongst his legal profession and became the Alberta managing partner of Miller Thompson, and then was elected to chair of the law firm in 2014. In total, the now Justice Davidson practiced law for 31 years before he got it right and became a salaried employee of the Government of Canada. On his way to spending the rest of his professional life in the sitting position on a bench, Justice Davidson was a charter member of this Rotary Club. Sponsored by Ash Khan, and serving over the years as Community Services Director, Ways and Means Director, Bulletin Editor, and Club Secretary. He served our city as a 2-term member of the Council of the City of St. Albert. He was also the driving force, along with Duff Jameson, behind the St. Albert Community Foundation, serving as the founding chair. A devotee of Canadian history, Justice Davidson was naturally drawn into federal politics, advocating liberal causes, serving as provincial president, and then on the national executive, becoming a major fundraiser and confidant of some of Canada's outstanding political leaders. Justice Davidson is a multi-talented Western Canadian, having performed with the Flin Flon Glee Club in The Sound of Music and Fiddler on the Roof. Justice Davidson plays the piano, various guitars, and a clarinet, describing himself, and I quote, "a frustrated, anguished admirer of the truly talented," unquote. He also likes to write, and he takes French language lessons. He has played hockey and hates golf, having developed a terrible swing that veers constantly to the right. Justice Davidson has been married to the remarkable, vibrant Carrie for 37 years. Together, they have 4 children pursuing careers in music, pharmacy, law, and education, and they have 5 grandchildren. Rotarians, guests, and friends, Justice Kent Davidson of the Court of Queen Bench. Here comes the judge.
Well, thank you, Alan. A lot of that was correct. Although I have been practicing for 37 years, it seems, and of course, in my current position, I am and remain completely apolitical without favor. It's sure nice to be here. It's been a long time since I have been here. I have to say it is strange to be delivering a presentation to a Rotary Club sitting, although I suppose I should get used to that, and not having all of you here in person. Typically, when I have been before this group in years past, I've endured incessant jeering, projectiles being thrown at the podium, and uninformed taunts and retorts by people in the crowd, and I regret but that we're not able to enjoy that. Today there are only pictures, and it's kind of surreal, frankly. The view from my perspective is no more appealing than it used to be from the podium, but you can simply turn me off if you like, and I likewise. It was strange. I was told to come that one of the to overcome one's anxiety in public speaking, that one needed to do was to imagine the audience naked, and I know that 2/3 of you are sitting there in your boxer shorts and pajamas. So, and I can't get that out of my head, so I'll be doing the best that I can to imagine all of you completely and fully clothed. When Alan suggested I might spend some time speaking about becoming a judge of the Court of Queen's Bench, I was excited to come to the club. It's been too long since I've been absent from the bosom of this great organization that I had a hand in bringing to life, and through which I have met all of those that I currently consider among my best friends. And of course, Rotary has just been a very important force in my life. And being a judge of the Court of Queen's Bench was always one of my long career goals. It's a wonderful privilege and an honor, and certainly it's a responsibility. Some might even think it's an astonishing reward for such a pedestrian professional career, but who might argue with the Minister of Justice? And I feel fortunately but utterly respect the weight of this office. And if my modest accomplishments have exceeded my abilities, I won't surprise any of you, because you all know that that was a pretty low bar. And I know that so many of you have reminded me that my modesty is well earned. I had visions of coming to you today just talking about my new role and the importance of the rule of law in our society, and the importance of being a judge in our society. But then a pall, of course, fell upon us, an occurrence which really is almost of biblical proportions. It's a plague of sorts. It's the pandemic, the coronavirus, and the world for all of us, I think, changed. A quiet has descended upon us all, and our history has suddenly become bifurcated. The time before COVID-19 and the time after. And our lives and our businesses and our professions and our relationships, they are all going to be changed. It is a new epoch, a rapid, dislocating, confusing, forced evolution of our society and our relationships and our businesses. And so this week, when I started to reflect on how I could stand before you, or sit as the case may be, and talk about me and my career without coming off as being sort of arrogant and self-centered, I realized that I couldn't, and it all seems too trifling, too inconsequential, and tone deaf in light of what it is that we are facing today. These are times which scream for a lot more we and a lot less me. And although I suppose the latter may be the only subject on which I'm the least bit qualified to speak. So I abandoned my initial plan to drag you through my professional journey, but I'd be delighted to answer any questions about being a judge when I've concluded my remarks. I'd be delighted to talk about it. It's a fascinating and rewarding career. But I chose rather today to talk about another journey which I've taken, which is perhaps more apropos of these times. It's perhaps more useful, maybe more meaningful, and maybe perhaps even some hopeful. We, collectively unassembled as we are here today, are all survivors of the great plague which the planet had visited upon us. And I say that so far. So we ought not get too cocky. I hear it every day. That's no big deal. I'm okay. I will be okay. And I think that those folks are just whistling in the graveyard, frankly, or more graphically, they're akin to the man falling from the 10-story building, waving at the man on the 7th floor balcony, screaming, "So far, so good." We are all going to be affected by this virus in one way or the other, in very personal ways. And we may look upon it as a distant threat, but I just wanted to remind everybody that it does lurk in places very near to this. And I know this because I spent the last 14 days of March recovering from the coronavirus. And I thought you might all want to hear about that rather unpleasant journey. I'm better now. I'm symptom-free, non-contagious, and I've certainly been cleared to return to work whenever Her Majesty and the Chief Justice might wish me to be there. It all began innocently enough. Carrie and I went down to Phoenix to visit with our good friends, Bob and Kathy Sear, who you know, during the week of the 9th. And the trip was, to coin a phrase, a bit plagued. We had heard musings and mutterings of the possibility of a pandemic being declared. And all I can say is that I will certainly give much more weight to that kind of chatter in the future when I'm about to make my international travel plans. But then we just simply paid it no heed. So we had a stop in Vancouver to change planes to one that didn't work. And so they had to get another one. I'm quite sure they had to drive that one up from Phoenix because it took us 6 hours before our next flight and left. And Carrie and I were delayed in the Vancouver airport, strolling and wandering through the Vancouver airport before getting to Phoenix. And we did everything but kiss the dentists who now infamously were in Vancouver that very day coming back from one of their infamous retreats. And which has indicated by some to be one of the original hotspots in Canada. So we arrived in Phoenix. We had a nice dinner with Bob and Kathy and Fern and Geneva and Wally and Joan, and we spent most of that week with at Bob and Kathy's. Other than the odd golf game and lounging by the pool, we basically watched the various news channels, except for Fox, that is, chronicling the descent of American public health. Understandably, we were anxious to return to the warm and safe embrace of the Canadian health system, and we returned on March 12th. Now, the very day on which my plane landed, the Alberta Medical Health Officer directed that anybody arriving from out of the country was to self-quarantine for 14 days. And I, having had 37 years of training as a lawyer, began thinking about how we might step around that, and I wondered if I could receive an exemption. The directive having by consequence or coincidence issued almost the day that I arrived in Canada, and I was anxious to get back to the office. I had a few matters which were outstanding that I wanted to attend to. I had avoided large crowds when we were away, and frankly, had been fastidious about my personal hygiene. And moreover, I thought it was a creditable argument that I'd probably crossed the international boundary before the pronouncement was actually made, and that I should be able to return to work. Chief Justice Mary Moreau was not very sympathetic about that argument, but rather she was resolute that I comply with the directives of the Alberta Chief Medical Officer of Health. And I sulked a bit, but I complied with the chief's direction to comply with the chief's direction, and immediately entered a 14-day period of self-quarantine. I came straight from the airport to my home and began a long prophylactic isolation. I was certain that all of this was unduly prophylactic and certainly unnecessary. After all, I had exhibited no symptoms. And that was while I was falling past the proverbial second floor window. So far, so good. The day after my return to Edmonton, I developed a bit of a cough, and it was a dry cough. Noticed a little tightening in my chest. Carrie quickly diagnosed this as me being a big baby, but I thought that maybe out of an abundance of caution, I should get it checked out. And I did. And the test came back on the 18th of March. And when I received the news that I had tested positive for COVID-19, my heart, I confess, skipped a beat. This was very, very early on the development of this pandemic in this country. And going from a mortality probability of 1 in many thousands to 3 in 100 made me considerably more focused. In the words of the old legal maxim, there is nothing to focus a mind like knowing that you will be hanged in a fortnight. And so, you know, when you in those early days, that was how you tended to look upon these things. My voluntary quarantine immediately became a compulsory one. My free fall ended, as all do, with a thud. And I became a favorite of Alberta Health Services, who were wondering along with me just where this was all going to take us. I received calls from Alberta Health as part of their tracing responsibilities on a daily basis. And every question I had about, you know, what was likely to happen to me was met with, gee, I don't know, we haven't done this either. So we'll get through this together and you tell us what it looks like. And at the end of the day, we'll be in a better position to respond to the next guy. I think we were, I don't know if I was the first, but I know I was one of the first 3 in St. Albert to have caught this thing. So over the next couple of days, I had a number of challenges. I had a persistent headache, fevers and chills, a few aches and pains, but most annoyingly was, at least for me, was the cough. It was dry and irrepressible, unproductive, painful, convulsive cough. As you all have come to know, as I've come to know, that the constriction of airways is a common symptom of COVID-19, and every day I'm watching the news, seeing reports of patients struggling and dying for a want of air, absolutely certain by the time I woke up in the morning, I would find myself in like circumstance. Fortunately, I never got to the point of struggling for breath. The closest I came to a ventilator was my CPAP machine, which I've been using for 10 years now, so I didn't consider that to be a problem. Alberta Health, as I said, called me every day. And by day 8 or so, my symptoms started to abate. And by day 10, I was feeling much better. By day 14, I was displaying no symptoms, but for a persistent and annoying cough, which even after 2 months, sneaks up on me from time to time, and is likely to, as I'm told, it is likely to continue to do that. I participated with Alberta Health in offering up my blood. They wanted to do some testing with respect to some antibody testing machines which they had, and so at least I feel that something good may have come of it, and I've contributed in some way to our exploration of this disease. So that was the unhappy journey that I had this spring. I was ready to return on March 30th or so. By then, the court had been closed altogether. and remains so, except in respect of emergency applications, some of which I have conducted from my own den in this very chair with this very screen. But I have not darkened the halls of justice since March the 6th. And it might be considered a long and restful convalescence and recovery, but I'm kind of anxious to get back to work. And I don't mean, in making this presentation, I don't mean to be hectoring, but I do have a couple of observations which I think we should all maybe think about. Firstly, this is a really highly contagious disease. As I say, I couldn't have been more careful, I thought, when we were on our journey. Secondly, it's not a disease that you want to have or you want any of your loved ones to have. Thirdly, social distancing and self-isolation and washing your hands, for all we hear about it, all of that prophylactic behavior, a word I never thought would be used to preserve rather than prevent the species, but it's one that I've come to use a lot these days. They're very important in preventing this pandemic from really becoming more calamitous than it need otherwise be. We are fortunate and wise to have wise and resolute leadership. And I speak here not just simply of the leadership of my court, the Court of Queen's Bench Chief Justice Mary Moreau, but all of the levels of government, provincial, federal, municipal, for really taking this seriously and reminding us all that social isolation is really the only thing that we can do to prevent the worst case scenario. I shudder to think what would have happened if I had surrendered to my more selfish instincts on my return to Edmonton and attended the office and mingled with my colleagues and socialized with all of our friends. I remind myself that I might very well have wiped out the entirety of the Court of Queen's Bench and the Rotary Club of St. Albert. So for that, I'm particularly glad that all of those to whom I've reported and with whom I've dealt have been so fastidious about ensuring that these compliance with these rules. But most importantly, we all have a weighty responsibility to do our part to protect others. And that's what I think I've learned through the journey. I mean, I had relatively mild symptoms. They were uncomfortable, but it wasn't debilitating. I was really fortunate. Everybody is not going to respond in the same way. Some are going to be very seriously compromised by this disease, and others will die. And so I strongly urge you all to pay heed to what it is that our public health officers are saying to us, and act like you have the virus, because you might have it. And adopt those recommended social distancing practices, obey quarantine and isolation. And I think the most important thing that we can do is ask ourselves whether we're prepared to live with the consequences of our laxity, remembering that the virus that we all can shed when we don't even know that we're affected can dramatically affect hundreds of lives in very life-changing ways. So I offer this narrative not to sort of to drive home the reality of the health crisis and to give an endorsement to our leadership, and to perhaps just offer some comfort to everybody that we're all likely to get this, and despite its seriousness, the illness is survivable by most of us. Now, all of you are saying, I know, hey, wait a minute. Davidson started by saying he wasn't going to talk about himself, and all that he's done is talk about himself. And that's true. But that's the part that I want to get back to, is that it is about ourselves. It's about us as individuals. We all must be the protagonists in our own life story. I know that. But now is the time for each of us to play a really important role in the supporting cast, because there is something much bigger than our own life story, which is going on. And as I say, we all have a very crucial role to play in that big production. The only way that we're going to navigate through the thicket, which has been foisted upon us, is to work together and to work hard individually. Back in the days when presidents were statesmen and quotable and smart, and there was a presidential inauguration speech by President Reagan, who I would never have thought we'd be in a world where that's how I would describe President Reagan, at least in my recollection of the time. But it was this. This is part of his inauguration. He said this: Under a grave marker lies a young man, Martin Treptow, who left his job in the small town barbershop in 1917 to go to France with the famed Rainbow Division. There on the Western Front, he was killed trying to carry a message between battalions under heavy artillery fire. We are told that on his body was found a diary, and on the flyleaf under the heading, "My Pledge," he had written these words, quote, "America must win this war, therefore I will work, I will save, I will sacrifice, I will endure, I will fight cheerfully and to my utmost, as if the issue of the whole struggle depended on me alone." This virus, or this effing virus, as my 5-year-old innocently blurted out, doubtless parroting something she heard in a conversation of which she was not intended to be part, is going to be around us for a very long time. And we must all act as though the very issues that we're talking about, the successful outcome, rests on our shoulders alone. Now, I stand down, of course, to Alan when it comes to epidemiology of the virus. I am not an epidemiologist. I can't even say epidemiologist or half the time. But Doc Murdoch is a guy that you can look to for advice on the urgency and the magnitude of the threat. I have been reading his commentary in the Club Runner, and Alan, of course, is one of my favorite writers and one of my favorite doctors and one of my favorite people. But as we chronicle the evolution of this pandemic, I think we all have to be just absolutely gobsmacked by how quickly we have devolved into a dystopian state. 8 weeks ago, we could not have imagined that the North American economy would be effectively shut down at the behest of our governments, that we would be prevented from traveling, not just internationally, but locally, and that our food supply would become imperiled. And but my understanding is that about 15% of North Americans have this. It will be with us until about 60 to 70% of us have developed immunity, whether that's through transmission or through a vaccine. And if we ignore our obligations to each other, if we are sloppy and stupid, and if we abandon mask wearing and social distancing, if we start conflating the reduction of restrictions with the elimination of restrictions, the road to that 60% will be horrific, and many people will die, and many of them will be folks that all of you know and love. So without some measure of individual personal responsibility, the disease will simply overwhelm our society's capacity to respond. And hopefully we can get to that herd immunity wisely and certainly. I know that a vaccine will help us get there, but it could be months, if not years away. In the meantime, we have to look after each other. And I think we have to stop thinking in terms of catching the disease, because that's easy. I mean, even I did it. What you are being asked to do is to take measures to prevent you from spreading the disease when even you don't know it. And I know it's the Rotary way to look after others, and who can forget the efforts, of course, of Rotary International in taming one of the world's most pernicious infections, that's polio. Rotary, of all organizations, I think understands the time and the investment and the sacrifice and the challenges of eradicating a planetary pandemic. But in time, so the world will prevail, the only question is at what cost, and whether you subscribe to the economic utility, which drives some to say we have to get everybody back to work, or whether you're in that group that urges more patience, not wishing humanity to become part of the commercial calculus. It can't be forgotten that this disease will be with us for a very, very long time. And it's going to take a collective action to vanquish it. And it will take all of us as individuals acting in the interests of the collective. And that means acting like we have the virus, being cognizant of the havoc which our laxity could wreak upon everyone if we embrace our old ways. And so I would invite you to think more of it in terms of Martin Treptow, that the whole path to victory lies in our individual action. So those are the comments that I thought I'd make today. I very little of that touches upon what it's like to be a judge. And you know, one might say that, well, Davidson, you've only been appointed for less than a year, and for the last 2 months you've been sitting at home. So what do you know about that? But I'd be delighted to answer any questions which anybody has about that, or any questions about this. I mean, I don't want to make too big a deal of it because I'm fine. But if anyone wants to talk about that, I'd be delighted to do that.
Kent, I have a question. What is it like, basically before COVID? What's it like in the life of a day of a judge? What goes on in your daytime?
I think the question there, Doug, is what's it going to be like post COVID? Because pre-COVID, everything was very a big part of what we do is public. We have to have people in the pub. You know, it has to be open to the public. These are public courts. Everybody is entitled to see what goes on in the halls of justice. And the trouble with moving to a video dynamic is that it is more difficult to engage the public in the proceedings. Secondly, it's really critical for most criminal proceedings that the accused actually be present at the judge and with counsel at the time that these decisions are made. And so the complications of having the accused present, from moving from a correctional institution into the courthouse to have staff there to do that has all become pretty vexing. I think during the pandemic, we are doing everything that we can to advance the cause of justice while trying to do things more electronically if we can. So as I say, I had a number of applications which are of an emergency nature, which I dealt with from here. Counsel in those cases were both in the courtroom, but I was here in my, and it was not a video conferencing situation. We've invested quite heavily in the video capacity, and so I would expect going forward, generally speaking, even when the COVID is behind us, that we'll be doing a lot more of that work remotely and by video conferencing. The other thing we've just done is undermine some of the more maybe archaic practices of the court with respect to the maintenance and management of documentation. It's a very paper-intensive process, and one of the things that you learn when you're trying to do an application remotely is if you don't have access to the electronic file, it certainly slows the process dramatically. So I think what we'll see is a dramatic acceleration of the digitalization of court records, which I think will be a really positive development. So there will be a lot of positive things which come out of this process. The judicial system it's a very traditionally based system, and I think what we're finding is some of the limitations of that, and we're moving towards a much more digitalized experience and a much more while maintaining those important elements of access to the public as well as presence of the accused.
Kent, I have a question. With your COVID-19 and you contracting that, how did that affect your wife? Did she contract that as well? Or?
No, she has an iron constitution. Somehow we ended up together for, we just happened to be in the middle of a period of 3 or 4 weeks where we had done a lot of traveling, and we had been together the entire time. And so by the time that I had got my diagnosis, we looked at one another and said, well, what do you want me to do? You want me to, move out? And we just said, at that time, if she had not contracted the disease, she wasn't ever going to contract it. And so I think what we think is that she probably would be one of those people who probably had contracted the virus but was completely asymptomatic. I had to sit out 14 days. So because I was sitting out, she had to sit out 14 days, which is social isolation. That means not going out to get the mail. But then when my symptoms abated, Alberta Health said she had to sit out another 14 days because she had to sit out 14 days from the last day on which I exhibited symptoms. So poor Carrie was on complete lockdown in the house for 30 days. And yeah, I think she visited that misfortune on me. Yeah, she thought that was my fault.
Thank you.
But she had no symptoms, and whether or not she's had it or didn't have it, I have no idea.
Kent, it's Jackie Hansen here. I also got tested March 8th after being in Pond Desert for the month of February. And I was really sick with all the things that you talk about, but I was negative. after the swab that uncomfortably goes up your nose. But I wonder at that time, that was March 8th. I wonder, I've been told since that those tests were 30% false negatives. And I have always wondered about that because I've never had anything quite like this, but they convinced me it was the flu. So
Well,
did you hear about that?
Yeah, I didn't hear, but I was. This was so early in the process that the two of us, I guess, were experiencing these circumstances, these symptoms. I don't think anybody knew what they were dealing with, to be frank. And I think that there probably were been a few mistakes along the way, and maybe they gave me a false positive, and I had what you had. I don't know. But they had. But it's not a comfortable test to have to endure. That's for sure. I wasn't anxious to go back. When we started, they said that you can't go anywhere until you're retested, and of course then they became overwhelmed and they realized that they just couldn't give that many tests in such a short period of time. So they basically said if you've had it and you're tested positive from 14 days thereafter, you're presumed not to have it, and because it's run its course. But as I say, Jackie, the worst part of it for me, the worst part of it for me was watching the news every night, thinking that you're, as everyone says, you're about to make this precipitous decline, because what we hear apocryphally is that there's instances where everybody's fine, and then all of a sudden they fall off a cliff and end up in the hospital. And so, as I say, I went to bed every night quite certain that in the morning I would be in the Sturgeon Hospital, but actually never even got close to that.
Yes, well, nobody in my family was sick like me, so it made me think that maybe the test was correct. But I have to say, it looking back at my activities and gatherings in Palm Desert and being with friends and stuff, how do you know? Anyway,
Yeah.
I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Myron.
Yeah, Kent.
Mm-hmm.
It's Myron here. We haven't had a chance to meet, but I really enjoyed your presentation. I'm just curious what your thoughts are about the whole process of being able to golf in Alberta. The government has put out some guidelines and stuff, and from a mental health mindset and exercise, what's your thoughts? And it sounds like you're a golfer as well.
Well, those in the club that are around you would take issue with that last comment. But I'm one of those members that the Glendale loves to have, in the sense that I don't play a lot, but I leave a lot of golf balls there and that. So I know that the golf, I know that golf is really a strong, it's an amazingly strong lobby in this province, I think, because who would have thought that in all that we talk about in COVID, of all of the really big issues in the world today, that golf probably is sort of, it immediately has this proportion that seems to me to be unbefitting a leisure activity in light of everything else which is going on. I think that, again, it comes down to this personal responsibility thing. I don't think we can rely on the government to save us from this. We all have to do our bit. And, the government will do what the government's going to do, and they will open up what activities the government says can be activities. And people being people and businessmen being businessmen will say, well, we're going to get this up and rolling again. But it's a very heavy responsibility on us individually and collectively, and individually as business people, to say we have to make sure that we are doing the sorts of things we need to do to protect all of us. And I know that they're going to great lengths in golf clubs. I haven't been out to the course yet. I'm not even sure. I think it opens this weekend. But I haven't. I don't know what steps are being taken. I would expect that they would have sole members on carts. I would expect the cups to be filled with foam. I would expect there to be I would expect them to take the rakes away. I would expect them to. There'll be no pin pulling. I expect that there'll be no food service. And the clubhouses themselves won't be open. So again, I think it goes back to that very personal thing. We all have to do what we can, that whatever activities the government permits and society is prepared to endure, we have to still bring that personal responsibility with us to say, yeah, maybe we should wear a mask when I'm out playing with these guys, and maybe I should make sure that I've got gloves on all the time, and that sort of thing. So the answer to your question, Mara, I don't know what I think about the government's decision to open. I do know that the government has said they shall open, and that just shifts the burden from the government doing the right thing for us to us doing the right thing vis-a-vis one another.
Kent, what sin do I have to commit to come before you at the Court of Queen's Bench? And what do you do? And then why do they call it Court of Queen's Bench?
Okay, well, for you to get in front of me, Alan, seems to me you're never very far from it, but it's any conduct which engages serious criminal activity or civil disputes or family issues. Those are the three main areas of responsibility that we have in the Court of Queen's Bench. And we don't really have a specialized court in that everybody, all judges deal with all matters, all of these types of matters. So we would deal with family matters, which probably take up about a third of the issues. And of course, in this COVID-19 time, we're anticipating that there could be a whole new set of issues which arise. And then there's the criminal activity, bail, we do, and then trials mostly of criminal activity. And then the civil side, lawsuits between and among citizens and themselves. So there's the actions between married couples and independent partners. And there's the actions between the individual and the state, which is the criminal sphere, and then there's the actions and disputes between citizens, which is the civil side of the work that we do. It's a very busy job. I hadn't anticipated that it would be as that we would deal with as much volume as we deal with. It's a real challenge to catch up to the pace because you might hear 10 or 14 matters in a day that of applications of some sort, and that you would like to sit down and reflect upon for a day or two before you render a decision. But that's not the reality. The reality is that you have a minute or two to collect your thoughts and to deliver your decisions on these short application matters. So it's a very challenging thing to do.
Good morning, Kent. It's Jennifer McCurdy here. Thank you so much for coming and speaking today. This has been great. And I might have wrong information, but I always assume that the courts have quite a backlog and quite a waiting period. And so this is just adding to it. What steps do you think the courts will have to do to move things through once things get back to a new normal?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jennifer, and I think that's one of the issues which vexes our leadership today as we try to schedule for the next year. Of course, we had a full court calendar that was scheduled. It's one thing about the job is that come January 1, you know precisely where you're going to be and what it is that you're going to be doing on all of those days on which you're selected to be sitting. All of those calendars and all of those schedules have really been thrown out the window, and now we're going to start from scratch and creating them again. I think one of the issues, one of the things that we're seeing a lot more emphasis on are pretrial criminal conferences to see whether or not there are issues that can be dealt with prior to hearing, and the other is judicial dispute resolution processes, where judges actually serve as a mediator of disputes between litigants. And we've tried to identify, I think, those cases which have had to be adjourned because the likelihood of those being rescheduled in a real timely way is pretty thin. So, I think that the court is exploring with the parties as to whether or not they'd be prepared to participate in a judicial dispute resolution process, which might be easier to schedule than a full-blown trial. So we're very cognizant of it. I think it's at the front of the consciousness of the Chief Justice and of the court and the court schedule to find out how we're going stuff this backlog into a shorter period of time. And I think that, that probably will reflect on a busier summer and fall than maybe I had in my only one summer in this job become accustomed. It was a weird appointment. I got appointed on the 22nd of May of 2019. And I was in Switzerland when I get this call. So, I mean, I'm first of all, I'm halfway across the world, bagged. We hadn't even slept. We'd gone from Edmonton to Toronto to Frankfurt to Zurich to Lucerne, and I was pretty whipped when the call came, and it took me a little bit of time to process it all. Of course, immediately what they tell you is you have, Mr. Davidson, we just letting you know we have removed you from the rolls of the Law Society of Alberta. Now, I had kind of a comfortable home there for 37 years, and this was a bit of a jarring comment. He said, you have to put down your pen and you're no longer able to conduct any activities as a lawyer, in no small part because you're no longer insured as one. And of course, which caused me to reflect on whether or not I had any travel insurance at that point over in Switzerland, and quickly convinced myself I did not. So I had to do a quick bit of scrambling there. It was, in any event, we were going out for dinner that night with Bob and Kathy Sear and Wally and Joan and Mike Keating and Jennifer, and I had this information that I had, and I could not disclose it until it was released by the minister. So it was a very uncomfortable dinner, and I also had to, during that very dinner, talk to my firm and let them know that it was time for them to find new leadership. And so I was appointed in May. I got back in June 15th. I had only a couple of weeks before the court took its summer holiday, and I had nobody to shadow or watch. So it was a slow start, shall we say, to a career that now has been completely interrupted just as it was getting going.
So Kent, I hate to cut off a judge, but we're running out of time. And it's probably my only time I'm ever going to ask a judge to stop. So this is great.
I'm glad you could join us, Anne.
Well, my internet's terrible. Anyway, thank you so much. On behalf of Rotary, we'd like to, what we do with all our speakers is we make a donation to Polio Plus, which, as you know, is our signature program. So we will send that certificate along. So thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing you in person when we reconvene.
I promise I will be there. Thank you all.
So the first bit of business that I have is that the Stephen Barr Memorial sculpture, which was hanging at Service Place, has been removed. It's in poor condition. It's been removed because they need to do some conservation work on it. So I do need to let the club know, because the club actually commissioned the piece. And then I have a second request. Does anybody have any contact information for the artist? So the artist was somebody called Miles McDonald, and nobody can trace him. So if anybody has any information on how to get hold of Miles McDonald, I would appreciate that, and we can pass it on to the city. And then I'm going to pass it on to club announcements. Laszlo, you had a club announcement?
Yeah, so everybody, this morning you got an email or a text from Robert. We need to do a quick building B, because guess what's happening next week? And I think John wants to speak about it as well. Flag program, we need to deliver our flags. So if anybody's available to paint some flags and create them, I think Robert would drop them off at your house, and but he needs to know who those people are. So please reply to that email.
So John, did you want to talk about the flag program?
Well, Laszlo's really covered the majority of it, and I think everybody knows that we are really going to need drivers because we haven't had meetings in person. We haven't been able to go around and strong arm you with a sign-up sheet. So if you could please contact either Don Wolf or myself and let us know what route or what neighborhood you would like to deliver in, that would be wonderful. It's a great social isolating opportunity to serve your community because you don't have to go up into anyone's doors. You just go on the front lawn, plant the flag, and leave. So please, please, please sign up for a route. We've got well over 350 flags at this point, so it's a big year for us. And with everything else being canceled and shut down, this might be one of our few fundraisers this year. So we really need club participation in this, and we're looking forward to everyone's support. Thank you.
So John, I was talking to the president of the Strathcona Club. What they're doing this year with their flag program is they're dropping the flags off and then they're leaving them until September to stop, which I thought was an idea, and it just helps with, you know, protecting everybody.
It's not a bad idea. I think the counterpoint to that I would bring up is that people really get excited when they come around the corner and see the flag there. And if they only get that experience once in the summer, or if some flags are out all year round and some are not, I'm sorry, I mean all summer long and some are not, that maybe the impact of putting the flags up would be lost or reduced. And that would just be another point to think of. I don't have an opinion one way or the other.
Okay.
Maintenance would be an issue.
Do we ever
Some of the
have-
flags get stolen.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I just to step in, I do agree there has been flags stolen just even when they've been left over the weekend.
Yeah.
So my preference would be to do it for the 3 weekends to get the biggest sort of benefit from people's appreciation of the flag for those special weekends.
Yeah.
Secondly, just to reinforce, I've got 50% sign up on my sheet. And Craig, yes, you are on with Myron, but anybody who can, let me know. I'm not too concerned about the pickup given the discussion, but the sign up for getting the flags out is important. Also, did we make a decision about putting them out on Monday, Tuesday versus the Wednesday, Thursday?
Yeah, the sooner the better, I believe. So Monday, Tuesday would be the best.
Then it will be Monday and Tuesday, and we don't want to drag it out because we will get people calling in saying, where's my flag? So please give me a shout. I will try and accommodate. And thank you, Ken. I sort of had you booked on Oakmont. So I've got some smaller. I don't know exactly how many flags, so I haven't done the distribution. I can't tell you exactly how many flags you'd be handling. But if you've done it before, you'll have an idea. And if you're doing the same route, that would be good. I'll try my best to get the information out to you. And thank you, everybody who has volunteered, and to all the potential volunteers. I will look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. I love your flags behind you, Les.